morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar with Aruba Instant On. Today's host is Reggie Johnson, and he is their systems engineer in North America, and he will be presenting today. If anyone has any questions, please submit them in the question box so that Reggie can answer them at the end of today's presentation. Reggie, thank you so much for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it, as always. Microcom Technologies and Aruba Instant On, great partnership. Love it. Thank you so much. I am finished for now. Please go ahead and take it on over.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Hello, everyone. I hope everybody's doing great out there. So as Julie said, today I'm going to talk to you guys about Aruba Instant On. I'm going to focus on switches today. I know sometimes I've done a full overview presentation. Occasionally I'll focus on access point, but our focus today is actually going to be on switches. So for the agenda, I'm going to start off by talking about some of the small business challenges, right? So when we think about small business, typically at Aruba, we think about that 1 to 100 user space, but you'll see with the switches we have, we got the ability to have a little bit more scale than that. We've actually increased the number of devices that we can actually support at a site. So I think you guys will kind of get it and kind of get a feel that, it wouldn't be any problem really for us to scale up to maybe 250, maybe somewhere even between that and 500. Really depends on the customer, right? So I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll talk about Aruba Instant On as an end-to-end solution. And I'll talk about, then I'll get into talking about the switches, and then I'll kind of sum things up. And I got some great charts and slides for you guys. We actually just released an update for 2.8. So perhaps at the end, I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the features that we've added. We typically do updates about every 3 to 6 months where we continue to add new features to the platform. And most of the time, these are features that are requested by customers. So as we look at some of the small business trends, in technology, remote workers, and kind of the do-it-yourself culture, within small business, all those things are very common today. So, small businesses are really relying a lot on technology, and they're continuing to invest almost at the same rate as a lot of the enterprise space. Everybody's kind of looking to do remote work from home. People have gotten a lot more comfortable with that. Matter of fact, I've had some partners that I've worked with say they've literally had employees saying if they couldn't work from home on their job, they were going to find somewhere else to go, right? So that's actually something that's become very common as well. 62% say, the level of collaboration amongst employees is higher than even before the pandemic. So people want to talk to each other more, probably because a lot of times they're home by themselves, right? They're looking to talk to somebody else whenever they can, kind of like, I guess, me with you guys right now. And then the SMBs are relying, again, kind of on the do-it-yourself culture. A lot of these environments, they don't have a dedicated resource. Matter of fact, I got one partner that I work with who's actually a friend. I didn't actually know that his business was small, that his business was dealing with small businesses, and his title is referred to as a fractional CIO. So part of his job is actually he gets paid a fraction for from each of the companies he supports to kind of provide recommendations and do some IT work for them. Thought that was a great idea. So as we look at some of the changes and trends in the industry, one of the things we're really starting to see as we talk about switches is more and more of a requirement for power over Ethernet. I mean, we're kind of used to power over Ethernet being required for things such as access points and voice over IP phones and security cameras. Now we're seeing it show up in the retail POS space, and now also things like smart lighting. And some of these devices are requiring a little bit more power than the traditional, up to 15 or 30 watts. Some are requiring the new standard that you see there at the bottom, which is 802.3bt, right? And we got a few products that we actually support that on. I'll point that out. And that's up to a 60 watt standard. So for some of those things like lighting, they do have a higher wattage requirement in many cases, and actually even some of the newer access points. That's primarily on the enterprise side. That's not something we've run into yet on the small business side. But just something to keep in mind is to make sure that you're selling your customers, something future proof that's going to be able to support some of the latest technology. So again, and that is, one of the business challenges, right? And really keeping up with the latest technology, being able to manage their budgets efficiently while also doing so. Enhance security concerns, making sure that you've got the proper product that can support a high level of security. So many times within the SMB marketplace for vendors that are selling those products, they sometimes don't have the latest and greatest offerings in security. That's one of the things that we've made sure that we've done with Aruba Instant On. And then being able to extend the network to every corner. So we talked about, things like power over Ethernet. Well, one of the benefits that kind of provides us, you'll notice in my presentation, there are a couple of switches we've got that actually allow you the ability to be powered. They can actually be powered via PoE. So maybe there's a room where you got an Ethernet connection coming to it, but you don't have power in that room. You can actually plug one of these switches in and it'll actually receive power over PoE. One of the other things we talked about from a wireless standpoint is wireless mesh, which I've talked about with you guys before, but remember we're talking about wired today, so I kind of thought that might be a good an example to tie in there. And then, keeping the network up and running again with limited resources, as we talked about, having, that ordinary worker that's got a normal daily job to be able to come in and do some basic configuration. So as we look at the Instant On end-to-end networking solution, so we've got access points and switches. We've even got our access points can actually act as a gateway or router, such as the 11D. It has multiple ports, so for smaller environments, it can actually be that gateway or router that then plugs into one of these switches that then has access points connected to it. So we really do have an end-to-end solution that way in kind of a non-traditional sense. But then if you look at all these products on the left, you look at the APs along with the switches, all of these products have the ability to be managed in the cloud. In that single pane of glass using the Aruba Cloud Portal, you can access it using your web browser or via mobile app on the phone, right? And that's for the switches or the access point. When you're doing configuration on the access points, there's an automatic configuration such as VLANs that are applied to the switches. That's what you see up there with the common workflow flows. There's the ability to manage firmware updates. We actually release these about 2 weeks before officially we push them out to everybody. So we give those that are like to be, take the early user approach. We provide the ability to do that before it actually gets distributed out to everybody, which ultimately we control. There's a topology view in which you can see the switches and the access points both in that environment. And then we also provide the ability to manage multiple locations with our remote management capability. So for you as a partner to really act as somewhat of a managed service provider for customers, or perhaps for a customer that wants to manage multiple sites. You think about retail spaces, doctor's office, dentist office, they can manage multiple sites. So these up to 150, right? That's a large number. Most people are usually around maybe 5 to 10, if at all, right? But we have the ability to scale up the support for 150. And then over to the right, there's our unmanaged line of switches, which I'll also talk about with our 1430 switches. I don't have them over there with the others because they're not cloud managed. They're simply literally plug and play. You just plug those in, plug devices up into it. Those devices would get IP addresses from a DHCP server that resides on the network. So as we look at our solutions, they're true purpose-built solutions for that small or medium-sized business customer, right? And I talked about our plug-and-play ability with the mobile app and being able to manage it using the mobile app or the cloud portal, right? There's no licensing or subscription fees required for that. You can remotely manage these from multiple sites anytime, anywhere. You can manage up to 50 devices, and that's where there'd be APs and or switches, right, per site. And you can mix and match that combination of access points and or switches at a particular site. We talked about the ability to expand the coverage. I used the example of having a switch that actually supports being powered via PoE. So they're using the example here of the smart mesh technology. And then from a warranty perspective, in order to provide peace of mind for customers, there's our limited lifetime warranty of uh, on our switches, right? And only 2 years on access points, but it's lifetime, limited lifetime on the switches with 90 days of phone support and online chat support. And you can actually upgrade that to 3 years or 5 years of support. That's for purchase. So, which we usually encourage you to do that with your customers to offer them that because you get some additional benefits of true next business day arrival. If something happens, that switch fails, you can actually call in and actually receive one next business day as opposed to just under a standard warranty as next business day ship. And your warranty, your 90-day phone support actually gets extended to that full 3 year or 5 year period uh, as well. So that 24/7 phone support, chat support, and software support, you already get that coverage regardless. That's with the warranty. So you get upgrades on next business day, replacement, and the phone support is 24/7 for the total warranty period if you upgrade that customer to Foundation Care. So let's take a look at the switches in our portfolio. So in the small business wired portfolio, we got unmanaged switches, what we refer to as smart managed switches, and then we have smart managed switches that are stackable. So if you look at our most basic entry level switch, it's our 1430 switch. These are gigabit switches. They support PoE plus. All of these are fanless. So a lot of times these are going to be switches that actually are sitting on someone's desk. And, believe it or not, that fan may not seem noisy, but it actually can be real noisy when you're just in a room with you and it, right? So real important selling point there. We also have a line of smart managed switches. On the lower end of that, we have a basic layer 2 switch, has no routing capability, very simple security functions, doesn't support things like access control lists, and we'll talk about that later. I got a good chart that kind of shows you guys how to position these to customers. But these are cloud managed or they can be locally managed. So all the smart managed switches can be cloud managed or they can be locally managed, meaning they don't have to be associated with the cloud. All the APs have to be associated with the cloud. That's the only way they can be managed. Not necessarily true with the switches. So they can go in an environment and be managed via the local web GUI on that switch. When you boot these up, if you don't plug them in, they don't have internet access, they get a default IP address that you can access to actually configure it and change that to whatever you want to change it to if necessary, and be able to manage that switch as kind of a standalone entity, right? Not associated with the cloud. All of these smart managed switches are that way. This one supports PoE plus. We'll talk about some of the unique things there around the 1830. The 1930 is, and remember that one's layer 2 only. The 1930, this is really our flagship product in that space. And again, a lot of those same features, but it has support for 1 gig or 10 gig uplinks, and it supports layer 2 plus, which means it also supports static routing capability. You'll find the same type of feature on the 1960. Matter of fact, you'll find similar features on the 1960, including the security, so support for things like 802.1x and MAC authentication are supported. So you see, this is why the 1930 is kind of our flagship product, because you'll find some customers in that space that do have Radius servers for authenticating users on the network. This is our prime product for selling to support that, and it supports those access control lists that we don't support on the 1830. The 1960 supports all of that and then has stacking capability and also supports that class 6 PoE I talked about, which is the 802.3 BT standard for 60 watts. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility there. There's also a 10 gig aggregator with the 1960, so a switch that has only 10 gig copper ports on it with some 10 gig fiber uplink ports on it. Very unique product for the small business space, but occasionally you're going to run into some customers. They have some advanced server storage, or they want to use this as a small core going out to other switches. We've got a product in this line that can actually fit that type of space. Remember, I told you there's a little bit more of ability to scale beyond that. beyond that 100 user capability. So this is just a good chart, kind of referencing a lot of what I talked about. I'm getting to some of these things a little bit more in detail. Remember the 1430s unmanaged, all the others are smart managed. You can see some ideal deployments or customer types that these are going to fit into. So as you move further up the food chain, you think about, retail stores, medical offices, things that require a little bit more tech, perhaps some authentication, professional offices. You think about tech startups and things like that. The 1930 or the 1960s are going to be more of a fit for those. You think about a boutique hotel, that's probably going to be more something you position in 1960 for as opposed to 1830. So I'm going to kind of step out of the norm and talk a little bit about kind of availability here as I'm talking about these, because the one thing I want to point out is, like I said, we typically lead with the 1930, but it is a very popular product. So the reason I'm talking about all these others is to really allow you to be able to position another product potentially where there might be a situation in which one that there's not a 1930 available, or perhaps there's not. I think we got great availability on actually the 1830 and the 1860, but letting sometimes that customer make that determination as to whether or not they want to move up a tier or down a tier in the product that they're purchasing. So this is the 1430. Again, these are unmanaged, and I've got a couple of things here, and you can see the various models, PoE and non-PoE, and the power budgets associated with those. And we talked about those being fanless. One of the other things I want to point out on here is, remember, these are unmanaged switches. But what happens a lot of times with customers that buy unmanaged switches is they don't have a complete feature set of things that are automatically built in. So sometimes they'll plug these into a fully or a network that has more features and actually run out of capability of maybe blocking certain types of traffic. For example, here, this is showing that we've got support of forwarding 802.1x authentication traffic. Well, that's very important, because if I throw this in line with something like a 1930 and that traffic needs to be forwarded to that server, it's not going to have the ability to do that unless I have a switch that supports that, right? So some of those things like that, we tried to make sure we supported. We also added support for things like jumbo frames that you'll see in the server environment, because there's some people that are going to want to throw these in there, and it's really going to be just a pass-through switch in many instances. So it's important that there is some support for some basic things, because these are unmanaged. There's no ability to go in and automatically change anything or enable or disable a function. You kind of get what you buy. So you can see all the models there. I've highlighted some units here that support PoE. And down at the bottom, I highlighted this other unit. It supports 26 ports, gigabit copper ports, and you've got 2 SFP uplinks. The reason I highlight this is because this product's replacing a 1920 product that we had, and that 1920 actually had 10 gigabit uplinks on it. So that is not the case with the 1930. These are only 1 gig. So when you think about the 1430, and I got the wrong number up here in the description, I just noticed here. Well, if you think about the 1430 and the 1830, these are going to only support gigabit connectivity, right? And speaking of the 1830, so here it is. It's our cost-effective entry-level managed solution, right? So remember, 1430 is unmanaged. This one's managed. These support something we refer to as partial PoE. So on the switches that support PoE, only the first half of the ports on the 8 port, the 12 port, and the 8 port, the 24 port, and the 48 port model, only the first half of the ports support PoE. And you can see it's actually designated on these switches as those ports are highlighted in gray here. There's something to be aware of there. Some customers don't like that, because if they accidentally use those ports and then all of a sudden they need a PoE port, they don't realize that they don't have any left, right? So that's kind of a pitch to maybe why not to sell PoE or partial PoE to some customers. There's also a model, there are non-PoE models of the 1830 as well, and there's also a model in which can be powered via PoE, as I mentioned. And as you look at this chart here, you can see the PoE and non-PoE models. Down at the bottom, you can use port 1 to actually power this switch using PoE. And this is what I talked about at the beginning. So, and then there's the 1930, which as I mentioned, and now that our flagship product here is 1 gig or 10 gig support on these, as well as PoE and non-PoE models. There's 7 models of the 1930 switch. Again, very popular product, has full support for 802.1x authentication, as well as MAC authentication and ACLs from a security perspective, and some other security things as well that might be important to user. The 1960, basically, it's kind of, I'll say for lack of a better term, it's the 1930 on steroids, right? It actually has PoE and non-PoE models with the 10 gig uplinks. All those features can be a DHCP client, can also function as a DHCP server, actually handing out addresses to other devices, support for the 802.1x, the MAC off, all that around authentication and security. And then there's also a 10 gig aggregator as well that I mentioned. So these switches are 10 gig copper ports, and then you've got an additional 4 10 gig fiber ports. So they could actually be 1 gig or 10 gig, right? That's SFP plus support on those ports. And remember, these are stackable, and you can do what we refer to as hybrid stack these. So any of these switches in this family can stack together. So the regular 1 gigs with 10 gig uplinks can stack with the full 10 gig aggregator, and you can have up to 4 of these in a stack. Now, one of the things I want to point out about the stacking is that if they're in a stack, then what you've got is you've actually got if they're being cloud managed, then they appear as a single entity in the app and in the actual web portal, and they can be managed, but they don't do what we refer to as distributed link aggregation. So if I need to connect those to another switch or to a server or something like that, I could not connect a port off of the switch on the top and the port off of the switch to the bottom and connect those and have that look like one big pipe. I can only do that if I stack these in standalone mode, right? So remember we talked about management using that local GUI. That's the only way you can do that. And again, those are the 2 options for managing these. So remember, cloud-based, you see them as kind of a single unit, right? In the portal or in using the application. However, from a GUI standpoint, if you do a local GUI management, right, you can actually, not only are they stackable as a single unit, we can do that distributed link aggregation across multiple switches to connect to devices for a larger pipe, right? So in other words, it supports distributed link aggregation. So as we look at the Aruba instant on switches, some of the key features we talked about, the fact they're really plug and play out of the box. You can automatically discover these by simply typing the serial number in the interface, and it goes out and actually searches to find the switches if you're doing cloud management. There's PoE scheduling. That's one of the things we actually updated within our 2.8. You used to not be able to support that with instant on products. So if there was an instant on access point associated to it, we had no ability to schedule shutting that port off. It was always automatically on. We changed that in 2.8, so now that capability is there. We talked about the management. We talked about the security on particular models, depending upon which one you buy. We talked about the PoE options and support for Class 6 on the 1960 model. We got built-in security, and I talked about all those things that you see there in that column. And then we also cover the warranty, right? So, limited lifetime warranty with the ability to upgrade that, to 3-year or 5 years, and kind of enhance a couple of those features around next business day replacement and the phone support. So this is just a high-level feature comparison of some of the things I talked about, and this is a chart that's really most useful for you guys. I'm not going to go through this, but you can see I kind of put it as an X. The X means yes in this case, that we will support that. So I've got the features over on the left, and depending upon the model of switch that you're looking at, these are the features that are supported. So as you're positioning these to customers, or if you're a customer looking at this, you can kind of have some idea of which product's going to best suit you and your environment based on the feature functionality chart. Here, you can see, for example, down at the bottom, I talked about Class 6 PoE support. We've only got one switch that supports that, which is the 1960. We talked about some of the security things, radius MAC authentication. There's the X marks here on the 1930 and the 1960. And so these are just some of the things that we've added in the 2.8 release update. I'll just highlight a couple of these. I talked about the PoE scheduling, right? So that could be for the sake of actually power saving as well. Sustainability, which is a popular term, is being used now. So now we can now shut down instant on products with this as well. You can put them on a schedule. There's transceiver information support. You can actually scale the bandwidth usage per device on the network. We now can actually scale that up to 1 gigabit. That's a lot. That's a lot to offer to each user. Before, our scale actually was probably a little bit too low. We stopped at 64 meg. External captive portal updates. So now if you're using a captive portal, there's no longer a requirement for that to be used with for radius authentication for users only. One of the very important ones here, I forgot to talk about the one at the top, which is actually the allow client list. So being able to allow clients as you bring up the network per that particular SSID, being able to enable it so that just because the client actually has the pre-shared key can automatically get on the network. As an administrator, you can enable it as to where when a new client comes to get on the network, you can make the decision whether or not to allow them access. So that's security function. And then the last very important thing on the list, we've had some customers and partners make this mistake of accidentally deleting their account. So what we did was we made it a little bit more difficult for them to do that by requiring them to actually type in a security code and kind of say yes a few times before they do that. Unfortunately, that's happened way too much, and we've had folks literally delete themselves from entire sites. And with that, that's pretty much all I have, Julie, and everyone. Thank you guys very much. If you've got questions, I'm here for a few questions now as well.
Thank you, Reggie, so much for that presentation. We greatly appreciated it. And I am looking at our list of questions here for you.
Awesome.
Let's get started with the first one. Here we go. For the Aruba Instant On software, will it work even though the device is not an Instant On device supported?
No, not for cloud management. No, it will not. We only support Aruba Instant On devices for cloud management.
Thank you very much. Next question. How many bandwidth speeds or speed loss do we have to jump per your mesh devices?
Oh, okay. So yeah, typically kind of the traditional rule of thumb is kind of about half. So if you're meshing, when you take that first hop, after that first hop, the next hop gets cut in half, et cetera. So for every hop, you kind of lose half the bandwidth. Now the nice thing is, so from a smart mesh standpoint, with our new, if you've got our Wi-Fi 6 product, we can use our 160 megahertz band, right? So we can actually use that band and have more throughput than you would traditionally get, from a 6 gig standpoint. So it kind of doubles. So that loss is not so bad if you go for multiple hops. But most of the time, my recommendation is usually just obviously that first connection you're going to get probably that full capability. So that's not bad. I don't recommend actually in a small business environment that people go to that second hop, but a lot of times folks will. So you can, but I don't typically recommend.
Thank you, Reggie. Next question here. For Instant On, can you manually push a custom firmware via cloud?
No. So when the firmware, so we produce the firmware, and when it's available, you can actually choose to receive a notification, right? That you've got that the firmware is available. Whether or not you choose to upgrade it or not at that point is your choice. Right. But after that, after I think it's about a week and a half or 2 weeks, I think now you can even postpone it some a little bit longer than the norm. But after a couple weeks, there's a default time frame that you actually previously set, at least as far as the time of day that you want that to happen. Like for me, it's at 3 a.m. on a Sunday that's going to automatically happen. So this last release, I haven't even done it yet. It just came out. It may have already updated my platform. I haven't looked yet, but there's a point at which it will happen automatically. Hope that answered
Thank
it.
you, Reggie. Oh, yes, of course. Next question here for you. For remote management, what type of security does it have for other people not to access it?
So there's two-factor authentication. That's probably the biggest thing that we offer available. So when you go to try to log in, to make sure you have two-factor authentication enabled, because that's primarily going to be the thing that keeps somebody else from actually logging into your account. I see this so many times that people don't enable two-factor authentication because for whatever reason they feel like it's a pain. They go to the Google Authenticator or whatever and get your key. It's not that big of a deal. Enable two-factor authentication.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Last question here for you. How many devices does each login manage, and do I need a login for each location, or can I separate each network from one login?
Yeah, no. So yeah, you can support up to 150 different sites on your single login. Um, Now you can also share your login with others, or you can give them access to have rights to go in and make changes as well. But you can lock it as to where they can't actually delete your account that you're primarily in charge account. But you can manage up to 150 sites with your individual login. You can also transfer it. Let's say you've got a customer, you're a managed service provider, and you've got a customer that says, I don't want you guys to manage my network anymore. You can actually transfer your ownership over to them so that they can then in turn manage their own network. Or, as I said earlier, there's the option to actually manage it along with them.
Thank you, Reggie, for answering all those questions for us today. And also thank you to everyone for attending. If you have any further questions, of course, please feel free to contact your sales rep or email us at sales@microcomtech.com. And if you wish to view any of the products mentioned or shown today, please visit us at www.microcom.us, and hopefully it is all there. But please remember also that this webinar presentation has been recorded and will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel so you can view this entire webinar again. Thank you, Reggie. We greatly appreciate everything you brought to us today, and thank you to everyone for joining. Have a nice day, everybody.
My pleasure. Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.